It has been so peaceful without EG here. I don't want to jinx anything, but I'm fairly certain that he won't be getting done with cataloging all the video games in the entire world anytime soon. Come in?
Hey, got all the games you wanted.
Whoa, are you sure? You have all the video games ever made with you?
You bet. Everything from 1958 until today. Hope you got the room, cause, here they come!
No! No! No!
Here you go, Chief.
Wait. This is it?
Yep. Everything's digital now. I was honestly done a few weeks ago, but something told me you might need your space.
Thanks. I'll see you later. Why am I not surprised? I've been looking forward to this for a while. I grew up with the Game Boy, and the Game Boy Advance came out while I was in high school. After the Game Boy cemented itself as my main method of playing video games when I was a kid, I stuck with Nintendo's handhelds throughout the GBA's run, on up into my college years. My first Game Boy Advance was the original model, and after I ruined mine by trying to add a light mod to it, I eventually picked up the AGS-001 Game Boy Advance SP, and absolutely loved it. Like many gamers, I simply ignored the Micro when it came out, as I had moved on from the Game Boy Advance by then. But around the same time, they had released a new version of the SP with a better, brighter screen. And even though I loved my AGS-001 model, I just couldn't help myself when I found the AGS-101 model on sale. I really love this handheld, but today we'll be ranking each model, so it's time to lay all the prejudice aside and take one last look at these amazing handhelds to find the ultimate GBA. Now that I own one of these, I can definitely say that I really do not understand what Nintendo was thinking when they released the Game Boy Micro. The DS was already out, which can also play GBA games, but you could also get a much better version of the SP. There are a lot of negatives to get to with this one, but it does at least have a few positive aspects in its favor.
There is one good thing about the screen on the Micro. It is bright, and you can even adjust the brightness to 5 different levels. The audio jack is a plus considering it was not available for all GBA models, and the build quality is very good due to the use of metal within the frame. Other features not found in every GBA that the Micro does have is the rechargeable battery. Its small size makes it the easiest to carry around, and those swappable faceplates can be fun to collect and use. Unfortunately, the Game Boy Micro is frankly drowning in design flaws. First of all, the screen is just too small. It's nearly 2/3 the size of the other GBA screens, making reading text a game in itself, and not a fun one at that. The colors are washed out, which is strange considering the AGS-101 SP, the model which came out around the same time as the Micro, has incredible color. Despite all that, the biggest issue I have with the screen is that it is not completely visible. The edges are cut off on each side, making the screen feel even smaller than it already is. You can see the missing pixels if you reposition the Micro, but that's not something you should have to do. As for sound, it's easily the worst audio experience across all 3 models. The quality is tinny with no bass at all, the volume at its loudest is nowhere near loud enough, and the volume rocker will not allow you to adjust the volume when the Micro is off. The buttons for the most part are pretty good, but the shoulder buttons, especially R, have to be mashed for them to register. It could just be my system, but I have owned 2 different original GBAs and 2 different SPs, and I've never had trouble with any of the buttons on those. I did have a similar issue with the DSi shoulder buttons, so I'm inclined to believe it's a design issue which shows up with age. You will need to use the included charging cable with the Micro. It is proprietary, and it's the only device which uses this specific cable, meaning it's likely difficult to replace if you lose it. You'll also need a special Game Boy Micro link cable since the charging port serves double duty as the communication port, which also means you'll need a separate adapter if you want to link up with different GBA models. Does that sound needlessly complicated? That's because it is. Moving on, Nintendo insisted on a striking design and opted to drop all the curves from the corners, making the Micro the most uncomfortable GBA to actually hold and play on. Finally, the absolute worst part about the Micro would have to be its lack of Game Boy backwards compatibility. You can only play the Game Boy Advance library. While not completely without its perks, the Game Boy Micro just has too many awful quirks holding it back. Bad video and audio coupled with an uncomfortable frame and a far more limited library make this GBA the hardest model to recommend.
Next up, the model that launched the generation. The original Game Boy Advance. Sure, this one does have some obvious shortcomings, much like the first handhelds in Nintendo's other product lines, but I would still rather play on the original GBA instead of the Micro.
I know it may seem odd how I keep bringing this up as a good feature, but I must mention the GBA has a regular headphone jack. Since there is a volume wheel, that means you can adjust the volume without needing to turn the GBA on. Sound out of the mono speaker is decent. The controls are comfy, with curvy shoulder buttons that are ergonomic even by today's standards. Speaking of comfort, I don't think I would be going too far by stating this landscape-oriented Game Boy Advance is the most comfortable to hold and use of the three models. As we move on to the negative aspects, let's get the worst offender out of the way, the screen. Sure, it's not postage stamp sized like the Micro screen, but the lack of any kind of built-in light really makes the GBA hard to use without sitting in a place with its own good lighting. The colors are also not vibrant, which just compounds the lack of visibility. I don't care for the start and select buttons over here on the left side. They only feel comfortable either in the middle or on the right side when it comes to control layouts. This was the final Nintendo handheld to use AA batteries, so unless you use your own rechargeable ones, you'll have to keep feeding this thing. You can't even buy a separate AC adapter and plug it into a wall somewhere since there is no power port on this. Even the original Game Boy models could be plugged into a wall outlet. Did one of the engineers simply forget to include a power port? With a fairly even mixture of good and bad design features, the original Game Boy Advance sits firmly in the middle of the pack. With a subpar screen and non-rechargeable batteries balancing out the best comfort, the GBA is a solid way to play.
With all the objectivity that I can muster, I declare the Game Boy Advance SP to be the best GBA model produced by Nintendo. Whether we're talking about the AGS-001 with the frontlit display or the amazing AGS-101 with a backlit display that even puts the original DS's screens to shame, the clamshell Game Boy Advance SP deserves to be number one on my list.
Nintendo got so much right with this model, you may be asking yourself, what could they have gotten wrong? Well, only a couple of things really. Remember how I kept mentioning those headphone jacks in both the Micro and GBA as good aspects for those models? That's because the SP simply does not have one. If you want to use headphones, you'll need to use either an adapter that plugs into the charging port or specially designed headphones that plug right into the charging port. The second negative, which doesn't bother me at all but I have heard others complain about it, would have to be the shoulder buttons. They are the smallest and spongiest of any GBA model's buttons, and depending on your hand size, you will likely be resting your inner knuckle against these buttons, which could cause some discomfort. Everything else on the GBA SP is fantastic! The screen is superb, especially on the AGS-101 model. The colors are nice and bright, the refresh rate leaves the least amount of ghosting, it's just as big as the original GBA screen and doesn't have any of the edges cut off. The AGS-001 model has a front light that can be toggled on and off, while the AGS-101 has two different brightness settings to choose from, with the less bright setting being the default when you first turn the SP on. The sound is on par with the original GBA, but the speaker is placed in the center of the bottom section, meaning the mono sound will hit both your ears evenly. The buttons are really good here, especially the D-pad. Along with the A, B, Start, and Select buttons, the D-pad has a super satisfying clicky feel. The SP was the first Nintendo handheld to feature a built-in rechargeable battery, meaning you can leave those AA's behind for good. The SP can also close shut and keep that gorgeous screen safe from damage, and when it's open, the design evokes the original Game Boy portrait design. The Game Boy Advance SP is simply the best Game Boy you can get. The best screen, controls, and durability makes the lack of an audio jack easy to live with as you kick back and play both Game Boy Advance and classic Game Boy games in the best way.
I do hope you've enjoyed this final look at the different Game Boy Advance models. I do try to stay as fair and objective as possible when it comes to these hardware retrospectives, and I hope that the series has helped you decide on which GBA is right for you if you are looking into picking one up. This is Steven with Level 1.
Hey boss, I just remembered. You prefer physical games over digital ones, right?
Yeah. Why?
Thought so. Okay boys, bring them all in!
Hey, thanks for watching! If you want to keep on top of the videos, definitely take a sec to subscribe. I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon if you want to follow me across the internet. Level 1 Sword also has a bi-weekly podcast, so give it a listen.